Good morning, Biblionauts, and welcome to Grix. This is Grix, and today we are addressing the most important chapter on our read along of the Dialectic of Enlightenment. I will come back to this chapter some other times. At some point, I will probably do a read along of the Negative Dialectics whenever I manage to understand that book. But that's far from now. There's many other books that I have on the way. So I tried to do the best I could when it comes to this chapter, the culture industry, which is going to be the title of this video as well, because this is almost like a set piece in the book as well. Of course, reading what we read until now is helpful, but this chapter really contains Adorno's most original and important idea, which overlaps with Walter Benjamin's own work, which I could also make a read along about now that I think about it. So without further ado, no more digressions. I finished the chapter now. As you know, I've been doing everything on the same day. I'm leaving, and I'm leaving, and I don't know when I'll be back. So by the time you see this video, I'll be freezing on some Scottish bothy in the middle of nowhere, probably trying to scavenge some food. but I did I do it again? I did it again, right? I just digressed, and well, one more digression. I'm gonna link in the description two videos or two YouTubers. One is the English YouTuber that I consider to be more helpful for a read along of this book. And the other one is probably my number one reference when it comes to Adorno, who's Fernando Castro, who's the father of Ernesto Castro, which is my favorite Spanish philosopher. It's in Spanish, so I don't know that any of you will speak Spanish, but if you do, definitely his videos are very good. He's a doctor in aesthetics, like a teacher of aesthetics in the University of Madrid, and you will definitely see how my reading of this text is partially influenced by his. Now, the culture industry, why is it so important? Well, if you feel, or maybe you've read Cioran's a book on the decadence of modernity, or maybe you if you're a reader, you watch movies, if you're into any artistic form, you will probably have realized that there is certainly something that's been going on in the last couple of decades, especially in the last decade, but in the last couple of decades, that, of course, Cioran calls it decadence, Adorno would also call it decadence, but better than that, a better word is homogenization. Things have become more similar and therefore more shallow, right? Books, of course, I'm not saying that original works are not possible. I'm not saying that complex works of art that cannot be classified are not possible. Maybe Adorno is saying that. I don't think so. But I'm saying that those proportionally over the greatest majority of books are the same book. Of movies are the same movie. Songs, they are the same song. Of course, the short format favors that. You make more money by making 2 1-minute videos than by making a 10-minute video. So you will address subjects in a shallower manner and think in tweets and live your life in YouTube shorts. And this in the 40s, Adorno started to see already, and wanted to diagnose it. His diagnosis is, of course, all along the lines of German fascism, and we will treat that on the next video. But all of these things are identifiable now. You can go to the supermarket and choose any brand of any food that is already prepared for you, and it's the same. Everything tastes the same. It has the same additives and the same raw materials, which are couldn't be found at all in the natural world. Everything is ultra processed. The fact that food is ultra processed is only one more reflection of how everything is ultra processed. We are at the edge of interpretation is no longer exists. Everything is chewed up for us. As movies hand over their conclusion, there is no longer anything asked from the individual except that he's no longer that. The only thing that is asked from him is for him to become a consumer and to become part of this whole. And in this sort of like culture industry, which is what he's referring to here, there's no refuge. You go back to your house and the house is no longer a refuge from that market. You get home and you are surrounded by products that still confirm your identity as a consumer. So either you have a relationship of consumer to product with something, or of producer to profiting from something. Either you want to profit from something, or you want to consume it. And it's all about quantity rather than quality, which means that the easier things are to assimilate, the more easily consumable they will be, and therefore the more you will be able to consume. I mean, online content is full of this. This is why this channel will never reach 1,000 subscribers, not even 1,000 subscribers, because it favors extreme simplification that allows people to identify everything and very easily categorize it into a certain stereotype without even having to do any mental effort of interpretation, without even having to give it the benefit of the doubt or anything like that. So this is what this chapter is about, and that's the part that I agree with the most from Adorno. I don't think that we are as trapped in this as he necessarily claims, and I am not sure that there is no escape. I think that there is no escape so long as you participate in that market. If I want to publish a book and put it on the market will assimilate it. Just like, I don't know, if you are a bit older and you remember the hippie movement, that was an anti-capitalist movement. That was a movement that had inherently pacifist, anti-capitalist, anti-consumerist values. And that movement was assimilated to a point where now you can wear clothes that identify you with that sort of like urban tribe without necessarily having to worry about anything, without having to live by those values, without having to embody the complexity of that movement. And that goes for everything else, and everything again becomes tribes. Everything is fragmented, so that again you are more identifiable, you are more easily targeted as a consumer, and more easily neutralized if you become a problem for the capital. But you only become neutralized by becoming part of it. You don't become neutralized by being, this is not 1984, although, as you will see, 1984 partially could be related to this book in the sense of like, for example, the Minister of Truth, how languages change, we will get there. But yeah, that's sort of like the overall part of this chapter that I agree with. Now, I need to address this because it's going to be the elephant in the room through the whole thing. And what do I not agree with Adorno? I will probably touch on that a little bit more when I get further into the last chapter of the book. But what concerns us now, and I think it's probably the reason why probably I didn't enjoy this book as much the first time I read it, is because Adorno he was privileged from the beginning, and he's highly elitist. He, for example, was you will see, and I think I skipped some of those passages so that you don't have to go through it, but he has parts where he's basically just using jazz as sort of like trying to call it low culture. So he has this kind of like conception of low and high culture, and one being better than the other. That's wrong, but that's wrong. To its ultimate conclusion, it is wrong in the sense of like, he is elitist, and we don't want to reinforce, or I personally don't second that elitist mentality. I think that a simple culture, or culture that is not filled with complexity, that doesn't make you wear a suit in order to go to a theater and listen to an opera, is no lesser than the other culture. But unless you're going to say that everything is subjective, you have to draw the line somewhere. Unless you're going to say that there's no good and bad when it comes to art, you have to draw the line somewhere. And of course, when you draw the line, you're always subject to being called pretentious, or again, elitist, hierarchy enforcer, whatever, bigot. When you're drawing the line, very easily can you be seen as someone who's sort of like gatekeeping for a certain group or a certain kind of art that is not valid enough for you. But you have to, because the only way that we can have frameworks and that allows us to understand each other and that are the only way that we can draw any limits to what can be done and cannot be done is drawing boundaries. And when it comes to aesthetics, when it comes to the production, it's the same thing. For me, as well as for Adorno, I draw the line. Of course, I don't draw it on the same point where he does, but I draw the line in repetition, in mass production. If something can be massively produced, it doesn't matter who made it. If something is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, and it's giving me everything is at face value, if it's giving me everything it has on its surface, I don't consider that a work of art. I consider that a commodity. And Adorno argues that everything has become a commodity. This is going to be a long video, but this is sort of like the overall view. But yeah, he argues that everything has become a commodity. You have become a commodity, a consumer, everything at once. Like the movie. But so yeah, for me, I would draw that boundary on repetition, because I am not a relativist, and I don't think that all art is the same. I think that there is good and bad art. Fair enough. Either there is good and bad art, either there is like higher and lesser art, if you want to, or there is art and commodities. I don't know about the terminology. I am developing my own ideas as I read with you. This is only my second read of this book, and probably will be the last in a while, because there's way too many books to read, and I get the ideas in this book. But yeah, just let me know what you think about that so far. And now let's get into the book itself. Now that we have addressed that Adorno is elitist and privileged, and that he is genuinely gatekeeping in some ways, he had a very narrowed view of what was going on, precisely because of not only his class, but also he was ignorant in certain ways, and he was pretty arrogant. You can tell that there is a certain condescendence. But I am not. I am arrogant, but not in a condescending way. I just have a lot of self-love. But if I were to grow up in the US, I would probably be referred by some people as white trash during my childhood. That's where I'm coming from. So I don't have this background that somehow would give me a narrow-minded view of like only classical music is the right kind of music or anything like that. And yet I am able to agree with a lot of what Adorno is saying. So now, let's get into the book. And I'm just going to be reading passages and commenting on them. So feel free to have the book. Also keep it afterwards, because I will return to this chapter. Probably not to any other chapter in this book, but to this chapter I will be returning. Okay. So first, here we have the sociological theory that the loss of the support of objectively established religion, the dissolution of the last remnants of pre-capitalism, together with the technological and social differentiation or specialization, have led to cultural chaos. Is disproved every day. So he thinks that this has not led, in fact, to cultural chaos. What it has led is to the opposite of chaos, which is harmony. Harmony in the sense of unity, of homogenization. Today culture does not produce chaos, but instead makes everything alike. That is a note I wrote on the side. And then further down, this is page 120, page number 1 of the culture industry Enlightenment as mass deception chapter in Verso Books edition of the Dialectic of Enlightenment. He says, even the aesthetic activities of political opposites are one in their enthusiastic obedience to the rhythm of the iron system. The decorative industrial management buildings and exhibition centers in authoritarian countries are much the same as anywhere else, whose monuments are mass of gloomy houses and business premises in grimy, spiritless cities. I don't think that any of that requires a great explanation. but I think it's relevant because, I mean, if you live in a big city, I go to London, generally everything is accords to that kind of description. And this was again wrote in the 40s. Yet the city housing, designed to perpetuate the individual as a supposedly independent unit in a small hygienic dwelling, make him all the more subservient to his adversary, the absolute power of capitalism. Because the inhabitants, as producers and consumers, are drawn into the center in search of work and pleasure, all the living units crystallize into well-organized complexes. The striking unity of microcosms and macrocosms presents men with a model of their culture, the false identity of the general and the particular. Which is to say that under the monopoly of mass culture, there is no longer, this is my note again, differentiated. There is no longer a differentiation or chaos, but only the identical. My calligraphy is not very good, so I often struggle to understand what I'm reading, what I wrote. Now, he makes a big stress on violence, and that's because he has an interest, which is to conclude that, you know, their value is that fascism that is sort of like inherent to the culture industry somehow led to the Second World War, or to Auschwitz, to fascism in general. And so he always he equates culture with the industry. And then in this page, you kind of see how he talks about how what matters is the benefits and the money. And empty, useless, dumb products of mass production is all that is produced. And that's just my notes, kind of like, you know, I don't have much space. So this is the result of turning culture into an industry. What is the result of turning culture into an industry? This. No mention is made of the fact that the basis of which technology acquires power over society is the power of those whose economic hold over society is greatest. A technological rationale is the rationale of domination itself. It is the coercive nature of society alienated from itself. Automobiles, bombs, and movies keep the whole thing together until the leveling element shows its strength in the very wrong which it furthered. It has made the technology of the culture industry no more than the achievement of standardization and mass production, sacrificing whatever involved a distinction between the logic of the work and that of the social system. The next page talks a bit more on sort of like the subject of cultural decadence, but in page 122. I'm just going to skip it because I have a lot of notes and I don't want this video to last an hour. In page 123, he says, the dependence of the most powerful broadcasting company on the electrical... actually, this is kind of... Alright, I'll read from here. In our age, the objective social tendency is incarnate in the hidden subjective purposes of company directors, the foremost among whom are in the most powerful sectors of industry: steel, petroleum, electricity, and chemicals. Culture monopolies are weak and dependent in comparison. They cannot afford to neglect the appeasement of the real holders of power if their sphere of activity in mass society, a sphere producing a specific type of commodity which anyhow is still too closely bound up with easygoing liberalism and Jewish intellectuals, is not to undergo a series of purges. Purges? P-U-R-G-E-S. I never know how to pronounce that word. Now, the dependence of most powerful broadcasting company in the electrical industry, or the motion picture industry on the banks, is characteristic of the whole sphere, whose individual branches are themselves economically interwoven. So that as you get like a symbiotic whole, and how there's no longer sort of like an structure in which you can very easily sort of like point out of it and be like, this is the one individual, this is the hand behind it all. Everything is interwoven. The ruthless unity, and here we go again to that sort of like entanglement. The ruthless unity in the culture industry is evidence of what will happen in politics. Marked differentiations such as those of A and B films or stories in magazines in different price ranges depend not so much on subject matter as on classifying, organizing, and labeling consumers. Something is provided for all so that none might escape. The distinctions are emphasized and extended. The public is scattered with a hierarchical range of mass-produced products of varying quality, thus advancing the rule of complete quantification. Which is to say that, in that homogenization, everything is quantifiable. We are numbers. That's all. That and if the only thing that the logic, the rationale behind the economical system that stretches our lives and our societies only understands individuals in terms of numbers. Every person is a consumer sample. This is what you'll see here when he says, consumers appear as statistics on research organizations' charts and are divided by income groups into red, green, and blue areas. The technique is that used for any type of propaganda. Here he talks about, like in the next page 124 and 125, he talks about like Kant's schematism and how it has been chewed up and served on a silver plate for the culture industry. And then he says, there is nothing left for the consumer to classify. Producers have done it for him. The schematism is intrinsic in the classification of that of the culture industry. Everything, as I said before, is classified, put into compartments so that it can be more easily assimilated. Although that compartmentalization, that fragmentation is part of the assimilation itself. That's how it's already assimilated for you to consume. The whole and the parts are alike. There is no antithesis and no connection. Their appearance harmony is a mockery of what had to be striven after the great bourgeois works of art. The whole world is made to pass through the filter of the culture industry. The old experience of the moviegoer who sees the world outside as an extension of the film he has just left is now the producer's guideline. The more intensely and flawless his techniques duplicate empirical objects, the easier it is today for the illusion to prevail that the outside world is the straightforward continuation of that presented on the screen. So you never leave the spectacle. And here I refer you to the book The Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord. It's a very short, very slim book. You don't need to subscribe Adorno to subscribe him, but definitely these books complementing each other when it comes to this chapter. The Society of the Spectacle. Everything is show business today. Which means that also every person is becomes bidimensional. When you are on a screen, you are simplified for an audience, right? Okay, yeah. Page 127. The might of industrial society is lodged into men's minds. The entertainment manufacturers know that their products will be consumed with alertness, even when the consumer is distraught. For each of them is a model of the huge economic machinery which has always sustained the masses, whether at work or at leisure, which is akin to work. You never leave the job. You never leave the job anymore. You work at home, and then the job follows you home, because you can. There is no distinction. Everything is part of the same sort of rationale. Now you go from working in order to extract a certain profit to consume the product that you were just creating, and you get home, and watch the latest movie, which is the same movie that's being made for the last decade. All right. Yeah, okay, the art historians and guardians of culture who complain of the extinction of the West of a basic style determining power are wrong. And this is still in 127. The stereotype appropriation of everything, even the inchoate, I don't know what that word means, INCHOANTE, for the purposes of mechanical reproduction, surpasses the rigor and the general currency of any real style. Actually, I'm going to underline it because I want to know what that means. Of any real style, in the sense in which cultural cognoscency celebrate the organic pre-capitalist past. No Palestrina could be more of a purist in eliminating every unprepared and unresolved discord than the jazz arranger in suppressing and developed any development which does not conform to the jargon. And there you see his sort of like, his goalpost is a bit too far into, because jazz is probably one of the most complex forms of making music. It's like everything else. When you want to subvert a genre, there's two ways of doing it. You can skip knowing the canon and learning the tradition and understand it and jump directly into it. I'm sure many jazz players did that. I actually have met people who did that, who left the music school, I don't know, the conservatory, halfway and became jazz players because it was easier than to just learn all the music theory that they needed to learn first. But there is also the possibility of learning and then subverting. And I feel like in that sense, if it's done properly, jazz can be one of the most complex music genres. So I don't agree with him, but I understand why jazz for him as the person that he is in his own context was a good example of this. For me, it's just an example of his own sort of like elitism and prejudices, which none of us is free of them. And since philosophy is explicitly talking about the ideas, and in another place you will only see implicit in the stories that you read, it's much harder to ignore those things. Okay, let's move forward a little bit. Yeah, okay, this is good. The individual who is truly weary must use his weariness as energy for his surrender, for the collective which wears him out. This is page 153. So everyone's kind of like worn out all the time because they are constantly trying to like live within that tension. They have to be inside rather than outside. One has only to become aware of one's own nothingness, only to recognize defeat, and one is one with it all. Society is full of desperate people, and they therefore are prey to rackets. And yeah, like, I mean, page 153 is basically talking about how, like, everyone must be one. Is all of these power dynamics within groups that you have, like, pretty much gregarious habits. You have to be the perfect worker, the perfect consumer, and just like the perfect soldier. That means that you have to be mediocre, devoted, and easily satisfied. I'll read you a small part of this so that you see where to start that passage if you're going to look into it. But it's almost halfway through the page. The attitude into which everybody is forced in order to give repeated proof of his moral suitability for this society reminds one of the boys who, during tribal initiation, go around in a circle with a stereotyped smile on their faces while the priest strikes them. There you go. I think, I found that a bit funny to imagine because it's very true in some ways. And now, further down on the same page, very close to the end, is everyone can be like this omnipotent society. Everyone can be happy, and this is like sort of like the industrial idea of happy, which means satisfied, monetarily, quantifiably, bidimensionally, materially satisfied. Everyone can be like this, and of course, there's also a sense of acceptance. There's an aspect here in which he's also referring to Hegelian recognition. You get recognized within the tribe. So everyone can be like this omnipotent society. Everyone can be happy if only he will capitulate fully and sacrifice his claim to happiness. In his weakness, society recognizes its strength and gives him some of it. His defenselessness makes him reliable. Hence, tragedy is discarded. Once the opposition of the individual to society has its substance, it glorified the bravery and the freedom of emotion before a powerful enemy, an exalted affliction, a dreadful problem. Today, tragedy has melted away into the nothingness of that false identity of society and individual, whose terror still shows for a moment in the empty semblance of the tragic, but the miracle of integration, the permanent act of grace by the authority who receives the defenseless person once he has swallowed his rebelliousness, signifies fascism. This can be seen in the humanitarianism of that's just historical references, which is sort of referring to the sort of socialist slanted films. The capacity to find refuge, to survive one's own ruin, by which tragedy is defeated, is found in the new generation. They can do any work because the work process does not let them become attached to any. I feel very identified with that. Although I only feel identified with the fact that I can be I can adapt to any job, but I think here he's referring more of like sort of like people who's trapped on a hamster wheel in which they will do any job in order to acquire enough money, enough capital to gather the goods that will allow them to fit into that society of the culture industry, which is not something I do relate to. This is the reminiscent of the sad lack of conviction of the homecoming soldier with no interest in the war, or of the casual laborer who ends up by joining a paramilitary organization. This liquidation of tragedy confirms the abolition of the individual. Again, he's preparing us here for the next chapter, in which he will make sort of like his most bold arguments about how the Enlightenment had within itself the seed of the German fascism of the Third Reich. In the culture industry, 154 still, the individual is an illusion not merely because of the standardization of the means of production. He is tolerated only so long as his complete identification with the generality is unquestioned. There you go. So there's no really individuality. There's only pseudo-individuality. You are only meant to fit into a whole. So society is fragmented, but not through the means of individuality, because that's individuality is like actually, just look into it. I'll read this passage. In this way, mass culture discloses the fictitious characters of the individual in the bourgeois era, and is merely unjust in boasting on account of his dreary harmony of general and particular. The principle of individuality was always full of contradiction. Individuation has never really been achieved. Self-preservation in the shape of class has kept everyone at the stage of a mere species being. The individual who supported, this is a bit further down, the individual who supported society bore its disfiguring mark. Seemingly free, he was actually the product of its economic and social apparatus. Power based itself on the prevailing conditions of power when it sought the approval of persons affected by it. So that's it. The true individuality, the true complexity of difference cannot be allowed, because it's hard to cognize, it's hard to reproduce, it's hard to compartmentalize, it's not profitable in the sense of mass production. Next page is about sort of like how the society of the individual is the same one as that of the consumer, and it's all about, really, like, this is 156, the kind of like the art world and the world of like writing, movie making, anything that you consider artistic, the work of creation, is all about what are you willing to do for money. Art is reduced to that. What people makes for money, that's art. That's how it works now. Yeah, it talks a bit about like the charm of novelty, and how sort of like quantifying through money. This is sort of like his a bit more supported in Marxist theory. He talks about on the next page, 157, about how sort of like attaching number value to things that distorts, confuses us in relation to the real value of those things, especially when it comes to luxuries. Things that are considered luxurious are seen through their number value rather than their real value. You will buy a purse for 3,000 euros or pounds or dollars, wherever you are from, but the real value of that purse is probably 30 cents. So that's interesting, because kind of like that aspect of narrow, that gap between the real and the number value becomes bigger, and it becomes more distorted now, not only in luxuries but in everything. And that's kind of like what he's arguing for in there. Let's just move way forward. Oh, this is just the very last page. Okay, nice. Yeah, here he talks about a little bit about bureaucracy, about the longing, rationalization. Okay, yeah. In general, this is about magic, and that's why I underline it, because it's more related to things I'm writing. In general, the name to which most easily attaches is undergoing a chemical change, a metamorphosis into capricious manipulable designations whose effect is immediately now calculable. This is 165. But which, for that very reason, is just as despotic as that of the archaic name. First names, those archaic remnants, have been brought up to date either stylization as advertising trademarks. Film stars' surnames have become first names, or by collective standardization. So here I wrote a long footnote or side note, saying it carries a fascist aspect in it, specialized jargons that fragmentate society in linguistic groups, favor the fragmentation and hooliganism characteristic of fascism. And this is the one part where I agree with Adorno when it comes to his claims about fascism being on the Enlightenment. Forget about the Enlightenment. I don't know enough history, I don't know enough about the complexity of the Enlightenment as a movement itself to make that claim, but I agree that the culture industry, the way that market works, the way that our consumer relations work, and how we are easily identified in that culture industry, favor fascist in the sense of authoritarian and hostile conducts between individuals, because its identification is gregarious conducts. It's pretty much everything that fascism requires in order to then segregate society and create sort of like a black and white ideology that in which there's obviously winners and losers. And in that sense, I do think that I agree with that, and I think that people's attitudes and the way they carry their ideologies nowadays, any ideology, is very exemplificatory of if I don't know if it's exemplificatory is a word, but if it is very exemplificatory of that. Yeah, and now we are in the last page. So first, before the last page, 166, we have the language and gestures of the audience and spectators are colored more strongly than ever before by the culture industry, even in fine nuances which cannot be explained experimentally. Today, the culture industry has taken over the civilizing inheritance of those entrepreneurial and frontier democracy whose appreciation of intellectual deviations was never finely attuned. All are free to dance and enjoy themselves, just as they have been free since the historical neutralization of religion, to join any of the innumerable sects. And here's where he refers to all of those groups as sects, cults, same thing. But freedom to choose an ideology, since the ideology always reflects economic coercion, everywhere proves to be freedom to choose what is always the same. So it doesn't really matter in what side of the political spectrum you are. It doesn't really matter if your hair is pink or black. It doesn't really matter what kind of clothes you wear, if you wear leather or you wear cotton. It doesn't really matter to where you think you belong, in which you think are your friends, in which you think are your enemies. Those who you call your enemies are exactly the same as you and have the same feelings you have about them, have the same basic ideas, just turned around through rhetoric power. But there is no true differentiation between social groups. The only thing that differentiates them is who do they want to neutralize and in which direction do they want to expand. And finally, the most intimate reactions of human beings have been so thoroughly reified that the idea of any specific to themselves now persists only as an utterly abstract notion. Personality scarcely signifies anything more than shining white teeth and freedom from body odor and emotions. Personality, I'm repeating this, and personality scarcely signifies anything more than shining white teeth and freedom from body odor and emotions. The triumph of advertising in the culture industry is that consumers feel compelled to buy and use its products even though they see through them. And that's it. That's the end. So we have here in the last pages we had like talking about the stereotypical tendencies, repression towards difference, social gambling in narratives of success, generalized conformism. This generalized conformism reminds me a little bit of Mark Fisher's Capital Realism book, which I recommend highly. Is that idea of capitalism being so not allowing for the conception of any other form of living, right? We all want change, but in the moment that someone actually wants to bring forward a form of change, a change of how things are being done in a way that feels more just to us, that person is immediately seen as naive, idealist, and realistic. That is the big success of capitalism. That it within itself it has cancelled any way of imagining a different world. Supporting the establishment, yeah. Also, like within that conformism, like most people kind of like support the establishment. They back up this because it's established. People will tell you like, yeah, but if you don't like it, go somewhere else. Or yeah, but we are here, and that's thanks to we are here because we are here. It's not thanks to any system. Of course, there are certain ideas or certain logics that favor societies and favor freedom, and we should keep. But we don't owe anything to anyone. There are things that need to be removed, and we don't need to remove the. It's not an all or nothing narrative. You can remove things that don't work and add new ones. But the logic of capitalism doesn't allow that. It always has that sort of like inherent consumer production, simplification, assimilation, sameness, and therefore also fascist narratives inherent in the way it works, in the way it produces, in the way it segregates. And of course, the ultimate conclusion is that this is also what we read somewhere else, that in a society that doesn't allow you to conceive anything outside of it, you are never able to, there's no refuge, you are always an employee or a consumer. And when you're a consumer, you necessarily are still interacting in the same space, in your workspace. So the workspace goes everywhere. You just change roles between employee and consumer, and very quickly go from one thing to the other, but always within the culture industry narrative. You cannot change the narrative. Either you want something from someone, or either you want something from someone or nothing else. That's it. Because in both cases, you are trying to extract a value. As an employer, you try to extract a number value. As a consumer, you're trying to extract the value of the commodity itself. And here again, like, because people, this is really the core of Adorno's Dialectic of Enlightenment. Like, this is the most interesting and the most successful arguments that he makes are in this chapter. I will definitely return to it, probably supported by other books. I encourage you to check any other content that you can see in order to see what the book, what this chapter is doing, and to follow its narratives further. There's many things I skipped here. There's many things I didn't understand. This is, of course, this is a shield, especially among pretentious philosophy students, that you will often get when someone says, like, there's a lot more going on here than I can tell you now. If you cannot tell now whatever is going on in the book, either you are ignorant of that thing, you have no fucking idea, or you are kind of like just lazy, right? In my case, I've told you pretty much everything I can get from this chapter. So I am ignorant. Everything, I know that there is more things going on here. I'm just ignorant of them. And I am also, I don't know if lazy is the word, but I gotta go, because I as you know, the backpack is there, and I'm ready to depart to my demise, to my ordeal. I'll be freezing by the time you see this video. Let me know what you thought about this chapter. Let me know if you see some of its narrative, some of its critiques reflected. Let me know if you appreciate the fact that it was written on the 40s and take it into account, or you think that we should read it as is now, without that awareness. And even here inside YouTube, YouTube was is very different from what it was. Now I feel like I am bombarded by YouTube shorts. It's so hard to escape them. I thought the sort of like short content form was gonna be confined to TikTok, but now it's in every other social media. I used to have Instagram, but now I delete it, and I only allow myself to download it once every 6 months, because it's made for you to consume, and it makes you a consumer. It is made to tackle all your weaknesses as a human, and in that sense, it's also it's part of what it says here, of like the product itself creates the need. Now you're no longer an individual with different needs that are only individual to you, but the products themselves tell you what you need. And yeah, I mean, like, I see the things that are being, of course, this is critical. This is a critical book, and therefore it's pessimist. The world is a lot more than only these things, and I have a really nice life. I don't live within the consumer society. I don't participate of it most of the time, and I don't behave in that way towards others. So there is a way of doing it, but I believe that but for that to be possible, you have to, one, have enough, like, have been given enough privilege to be lucky enough to have the capacity and the means to find time for yourself to arrive to those conclusions. And thus you have to have a lot of willpower, self-control, more than most people has, especially because they have been denied of it by being raised on this consumer society. And I mean, like, I only have to look at my cousin. My cousin, like, his mother, like, since he was like a 2 year old, put him on a tablet on YouTube Kids, and spent his whole day looking at a screen. What kind of brain is gonna come out of that? I don't think that is gonna. I think it's gonna come the kind of like soldier brain that we were talking about before. Someone who's like easily, definitely doesn't have the mechanisms to realize of any condition, to change or criticize any narrative, any complex narrative that is sort of like structured around their lives, and only allowing them to live through a narrow path of and behave in a certain way towards others. It's and yeah, of course, in that case, you are going to end up living in sort of like passive conformity, apathy. I mean, I even, in capitalism, you see as well, like, Mark Fisher addresses mental health issues and everything. All of that, to a degree, has a lot to do with this chapter, with this chapter is talking about. So in that sense, I consider the chapter of the culture industry from this book to be one of the most important things that someone could read today, so long as they live in cities, so long as they behave and collaborate of this thing, this part of civilization, or this society that we are all a part of, and it's hard to escape. I'm escaping it for a little bit, and then I'll have to come back here and get my consumer uniform back on. But yeah, that was all until now, and I don't know if there will be any videos left by the time you see this. I have to make the other video, but that will be much more quick and shallow, because I cannot dedicate. I mean, I don't have enough time to make another video for the next. All of these videos that you've been seeing, last one last week, this one and the next one, are all happening on the same day. So imagine, I'm not stiff. I cannot read as fast. So I will do my best to make a concluding video on the last chapter. But this is the chapter that I was trying to get to, and it's the one that I consider, if people should read anything, I'd say, yeah, this is a chapter you should read. This is something that I am glad for whoever got to the end of this video. I am assuming that you also got to the end of the chapter, and I'm glad you're here with me, and please let me know what you thought about it. I'll see you on the other side. Thank you, BookTube.